Good day students, and welcome back to our fifth lesson for topic development. To start with, I would like to recap what we did last lesson. Okay, so last lesson we compared and contrasted the economic and social development of MEDCs and LEDCs. And by doing the comparison, we also find out that even if finding the economic wealth is the easiest way to compare places, the disadvantage of GDP or GNP, however, is that it does not show differences in wealth between people and places in a country. And also we found out that apart from social and economic development, there are other indicators which include measures related to education. When we talk about education, we were focusing also on adult literacy. The other measure, diet, employment structures, trade, and energy consumption. So at the end of today's lesson, you should be able to define the term NICs and BRICS, and also list the countries that make up the NICs and BRICS. Now, last lesson we saw that the world is divided into two groups in regards to economic development. And then we saw that the more economically developed countries, the MEDCs, they are richer and more industrialized, and countries falling in that category, as we saw last lesson, they are the developed north, and they are mostly found in the northern hemisphere. Also, we noted that even if Australia and New Zealand, they fall in the southern hemisphere, they fall part of the MEDCs. And then we have the less economically developed countries, which include the poorer, less industrialized countries of the so-called developing South. Now, developed North and the developing South, they are divided by an imaginary line, which we call, this is the imaginary line, okay, with the red arrow there. It's the red line that separates the two, and it's called the Brent line. Now, many countries in the poor South have become more developed since the 1980s. And so, many people now think that the Brent line is no longer useful. For example, some countries that are considered to be developing have experienced rapid growth, especially in manufacturing and tertiary industries in recent years. We call these countries the newly industrialized countries, or NICs. NICs and emerging countries is another category, okay, shaded in light pink. And I've put the pink stars there to highlight them further. Okay, so what are NICs? Okay, NIC stands for newly industrialized countries. These are countries that are considered to be developing but have experienced rapid growth, especially in manufacturing and tertiary industries in recent years. And they are also sometimes referred to as newly industrializing economies or advanced developing countries. So what are examples of NICs? Okay, we see Mexico, Brazil, Turkey, South Africa, India, China, Thailand, Malaysia, Philippines, and Indonesia. We have seen all the 10 NICs. Now, from which region does each country comes from? Let us do a little activity. Okay, we're going to classify all the NICs we've discussed before. We're going to classify them according to regions. So the regions we have here: North America, South America, Africa, Asia, and Eurasia. As you can see, Europe is not there, but Eurasian region. So let's classify. Mexico, we're going to place it in North America. From South America, we have Brazil. From Africa, we have South Africa. From Asia, we have quite a lot. We have India, we have China, we have Philippines, Malaysia, Thailand, and Indonesia. And then from Eurasia, we have Turkey. Okay, we move on. Characteristics of NICs. One characteristic of NIC and of an NIC is it's a rapidly growing economy, which means it is rapidly getting richer. Next, economy is moving away from being based on mainly primary industry, for example, agriculture, to secondary industry, example, manufacturing, and tertiary, where we talk about the service jobs like IT services. Another one, we see that NICs have a strong and stable government. The countries in that group the focus is on trade and exports. There is a large workforce which is reliable and initially prepared to work for long hours but for little pay. Okay, we're going to look at more characteristics, few more. Products are kept cheap and competitive by using cheap, well-disciplined workers. So we're talking about low labor costs. Workers become better educated and more skilled over time. Investment in manufacturing, meaning secondary industry, and technology, where we talk about quaternary. This you're going to discuss further when you move on to S4. Okay. Profits made are invested in developing more industries and buying home produce goods. So we are talking about expanding domestic markets. And finally, attracts multinational companies. So when there is increased economic freedom and a strong foreign direct investment, it attracts multinational companies. Now remember that every country is unique, where you can have areas within the country considered to be poor or vice versa. So what are BRICS or BRICS? Now BRICS is an acronym for the developing nations of Brazil, Russia, India, and China. So it's called BRIC. It refers to the idea that China and India will, by 2050, become the world's dominant suppliers of manufactured goods and services, respectively, while Brazil and Russia will become similarly dominant as suppliers of raw materials. This is due to low labor and production costs. And lastly, about BRICS. So as of 2010, South Africa joined the BRIC group, which is now referred to as BRICS or BRICS. So B stands for Brazil, R for Russia, I India, C China, and now S with South Africa. So what have we learned today? Today we have learned that NICs, or newly industrialized countries, are those that are considered to be developing but have experienced rapid growth, especially in manufacturing and tertiary industry in recent years. We also learned that the developed North and the developing South are divided by an imaginary line called the Brent line. Many countries in the poor South have experienced rapid growth in recent years, and we call these countries the newly industrialized countries, or NICs. Countries that make up the NICs include Mexico, Brazil, South Africa, Turkey, India, China, Philippines, Malaysia, Indonesia, and Thailand. We also describe the characteristics of NICs, whereby we discussed that they are rapidly growing economies. Economy is moving away from being based on mainly primary industry to secondary industry and tertiary, meaning service jobs. And they have strong and stable government, and the focus mainly is on trade and exports, to name a few. Next, we learned that BRICS is an acronym for the developing nations of Brazil, Russia, India, and China, originally BRIC. And as of 2010, South Africa joined the BRIC group, which is now referred to as BRICS. BRICS also refers to the idea that China and India will, by 2050, become the world's dominant suppliers of manufactured goods and services, respectively, while Brazil and Russia will become similarly dominant as suppliers of raw material. Countries that make up BRICS, finally, we found out that countries that make up BRICS include Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. Next lesson, we're going to define the term sustainable development, and we're going to explain why sustainable development should be encouraged, and we are going to give examples of sustainable development projects, and we're going to give examples of Seychelles projects that are sustainable. Before we end our lesson, we're going to look at our homework activity for our next lesson. Now we have 4 questions for the homework activity, where question 1 we have to complete for next lesson, whereas question 2 and 3 and 4 we have to complete it for next week. So this is for next lesson. Quite easy, it summarizes our lesson. Number 1, we're going to match each terms with its correct description. So we have the terms here and we have the descriptions. Now you're going to use arrows and you're going to join the correct term with the correct description. You can take a picture now so that you can later on do the exercise in your exercise book. Okay? Next, let us now look at the 3 questions which we will complete for next week. Okay, the 2 questions, you're going to use the map to your right with the key, and you're going to answer question 2 first. Name 3 continents in the richer north and 3 in the poorer south. So that one also you might use your atlas to find out the countries that are above the Brent line and also the countries below the Brent line. 3, study the map carefully, and part 1, state how the 5 indicators on the map show that Africa is economically the least well off. And 2, state 3 other indicators that might be used to measure differences in development between countries. Okay, whereas question 4, you have to make a copy of the table below, this one here, where you have MEDCs and LEDCs, and under the correct column, add the information below the table to show the differences between MEDCs and LEDCs. So you have all these information, high GDP, low GDP, high birth rate, etc. So you're going to pick each one and choose whether you are talking about MEDCs or you are talking about LEDCs. So these 4 questions are for next week. Now please don't forget to take a picture for you to attempt the activity later on. I have now reached the end of lesson 5 in development. I thank you for your attention. Remember, students, to keep following the health guidelines from the Ministry of Health. Wash your hands and stay safe. Until next time, thank you and goodbye.